When are the religious going to learn? I mean, really, when are they going to stop making excuses and living in a ridiculous religious fantasy land and just come to reality as it demonstrably is without their feelings getting in the way? That's what I'd really like to know, and sadly, it doesn't seem that it's going to happen anytime soon. Here comes part 2 of the Michael Egnor Proofs for God video. And if you think he's going to do any better now that he's got the Aquinas crap out of the way, you're just wrong. It is important that we address these things, though, and recognize why they have the problems that they do. They're never going to change because, as we all know, they're just immature children throwing temper tantrums because they aren't getting their way. And that's not something that anybody ought to put up with. People need to be adults. And the fact that so many refuse, that's kind of an issue, wouldn't you say? So let's keep going through the last 5, plus a little bit of bonus content at the end. And away we go. So here we go with the 6th supposed proof, although I don't think they know what that word means. It starts off with, the 6th proof is something that's called the Thomistic proof, and it differs from the first 5. Well, yeah, because now you're not talking about Aquinas' 5 ways, but let's continue. The 6th proof is the notion that the essence of something, what something is, and the fact that it exists are 2 separate things. Yeah, but are they though? I mean, it's a quibble to be sure, but since the 2 are undeniably linked, I don't know that you can call them separate things at all. By defining something's existence, you also have to take into account what makes it up. Let's let them get a little further, though. I can describe something without it actually existing, or I can point to the fact that it actually exists. And there needs to be something outside of the system that connects possibilities with actualities of existence. Yeah, while I can agree that you can do things, you can't really describe something that isn't real without acknowledging that it isn't real. It's a concept or an idea. It doesn't have any actual form. It's just something that you made up in your head. That's what it actually is. You don't have to bring that up, but then it's an incomplete description, isn't it? And this is kind of where the religious go wrong, because they assert that their gods are real, but they can't demonstrate that their gods are real. Just because you say a thing, that doesn't make that thing so. Every piece of evidence that we have shows that the gods are just made up. But they don't like that, do they? Then it gets to what I hinted at in the last video, which is there needs to be something that is essentially existence itself. And that is what all men call God. Yeah, really? I don't. Hindus don't. Scientologists don't. Apparently, they're just wrong. This is back to everybody's just like us, though, which is a common problem among the religious. So this doesn't prove God at all. It doesn't prove anything, but the fact that you're not really thinking about this hard enough. The 7th proof is sometimes called the Neoplatonic proof. There needs to be a singular, infinitely powerful cause to the organization of objects in the world. Really? Says who? Because you have to remember that most of this is just bald assertion, not demonstration. It's what they wish was true, not what they can prove actually is. The fact that a square is next to a triangle doesn't prove that there's a meaning behind it. There doesn't have to be intentionality. Sometimes what is just is. This seems to be a complete misunderstanding of the nature of reality. They bear geometrical relationships. They bear causal relationships. Really, demonstrate that, please. I'm just looking around for an example here. My dog is sitting next to my cat. There is a spatial relation between them, but that doesn't mean that my dog caused my cat to sit there or vice versa. Two things just happened to be in spatial proximity. So what? It doesn't mean anything. Yet they are asserting something is behind it all without being able to demonstrate that that's true. They are desperate to get to their conclusion, which is to put this whole orchestra together requires an infinitely powerful, metaphysically simple entity, which is God. Really? Prove it. This is where they get lost because they can't actually prove anything. They can only assert it, and asserting something isn't enough. Following that is a note which talks about ancient philosophers, and they really don't matter. This is all just bald assertion. Everything which is composite has a cause, but that can't be validated. It's just something that was claimed, and claims mean nothing without support. Funny, they never seem to have any. The eighth proof is the Augustinian proof, and yeah, we're back to an old guy said. That's all any of this is, if you notice. Now, I'm not saying that just because somebody in the ancient world said a thing, it's got to be wrong. I'm saying anything that anybody says at any point in time, it's got to be backed up, and none of this ever is. It's relying on the ignorance of the ancient world because it gets you where you really want to go. So let's continue. That is the proof that concepts such as mathematical concepts and universals like justice and mercy clearly have some kind of real existence that's independent of human minds. No, they don't. Mathematics is just a descriptor. It describes the natural world. It's something that we made up. It is a language of sorts, and like all other languages, it exists only in our heads. It says that it has to exist in reality, or we couldn't describe it to others, but that goes for languages too, right? I can describe a dragon to you. Does that mean a dragon is real? Here is where they have a lot of problems. They come up with very convenient concepts to support their beliefs, but they never step out of their comfort zone to put those concepts to the test. I just came up with proof that it's ridiculous, and that took me about half a second. They're not trying to get to the truth, though. They're trying to get to their own emotional comfort. They just want this stuff to be true, but wanting it doesn't mean anything. Then it goes on to say, St. Augustine made the argument. I think it's a very good argument that a much more reasonable way to understand this is that universals exist in the mind of God. Really? Why not in the mind of invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies? Why God? Well, because they want God, but that doesn't mean that God exists. Then it goes on to note that Augustine was perhaps the greatest Christian philosopher of antiquity, and certainly the one who exerted the deepest and most lasting influence. Yeah, I always get really nervous when they drop off in the middle of a sentence, so I went back and I looked at it. In fact, in the SEP entry, there are no ellipses. It was just the end of a sentence. So where they got that, I don't know. Clearly, they can't even quote properly. Still, it really doesn't matter. Just because somebody is widely regarded as authoritative, that doesn't mean anything. Either you're right or you're not. And that's a matter for the evidence, not your fan club. So this one goes absolutely nowhere. The ninth supposed proof, which, let's be honest, none of these have been remotely impressive so far, is the rationalist proof. The rationalist proof, which was championed by Leibniz several hundred years ago, is the notion that everything that exists necessarily has some explanation for why it exists the way it does. Cool. Back that up with evidence. I know I've said this before, but just because you want an explanation, that doesn't mean you know what it is. This is where the whole "therefore God" has a problem, because it's just asserting knowledge that you can't prove that you actually have. It then goes on to say that things don't exist for no reason. Well, how do you know that? Especially in light of the next line. That doesn't mean that we can know the reasons may be obscure. then how do you know that the reasons exist at all? This is an assertion and basic burden of proof. You make a claim, you gotta back it up. Now, of course, there's a lot of definition that goes into this here. What do you mean by reason? What do you mean by purpose? That's even harder to back up when you think about it. How do you demonstrate purpose when you can't even demonstrate that your God is real? Then they leap to that implies that there's an ultimate explanation that's outside of nature and is, in itself, not in need of explanation. And that is God. Yeah, but it implies nothing of the sort except in your desperate little head. Then again, you have to remember that none of this stuff is supposed to prove anything to the non-believer. They don't care about us. It's all intended to shore up the blind faith of those who already believe. If you already believe, you don't need proof, which is why these aren't proofs. They're just excuses. They are bald rationalizations for why the already faithful can remain confident in their beliefs. But they're not going to convince anybody else of anything. The 10th proof, which I think is a very powerful way that we often overlook, is the existence of moral law. Oh look, something else they can't demonstrate is real. It's just another assertion offered with absolutely no corroboratory evidence. This one is really simple to dismiss because you only have to look at the real world to see the wide variety of different moral views. This might have appealed when people rarely went more than a couple of miles from where they were born, and everybody they encountered thought largely the same way, but today it's laughably ridiculous. It also works against moral realists who are making the same kind of claim. What about the people who have similar moral views? Yeah, but what about the ones who don't? They have to come up with an excuse that ultimately breaks their model because their model is based on, well, what about all the commonalities? This one, because it's the last, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on it than it probably deserves. There is absolutely no basis in fact for any moral argument whatsoever. Just because you want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. We all acknowledge in our daily lives implicitly, and we should do it explicitly, that there is an objective morality out there that's separate from our minds. No, we don't. There goes the everybody's just like us thing again. Here is what you ought to do. But why should we believe you? Because that's what you want, or because that's what you can prove. The sad fact is, they can't prove anything. This is all about emotional comfort, not about demonstrable fact, and that's kind of a problem. That is, we all acknowledge, for example, that it's not okay to kill innocent people. Do we, though? You might want to bring that up to Muslims who engage in honor killings and throw gay people off of roofs. Or the Nazis, the Christians who murdered a whole bunch of people in execution camps because they just so happened to be Jews or gypsies or gay or, the list goes on and on. Of course, you can quibble over the word innocent, but if you can simply declare people guilty or innocent at a whim, then you've left the realm of coherent conversations. In that case, can't a murderer say, well, yeah, sure, I kill people, but they're all guilty? I think they even understand where the objections are going to come when they say, well, I don't think it's okay to kill innocent people, but hey, if the guy next to me says it's okay, or the guy in the front of the church says it's okay, well, who knows? Isn't that exactly what's going on worldwide? Isn't that how differences in the various legal and moral systems of the world work? Everyone is not just like you. Sadly, this is often the justifications for how a particular culture or society does things because, well, our God said so. Really, how do you know that? It's all just an excuse, but lots of people do it that way, don't they? That's where you get things like Sharia law, based entirely on what people think Allah wants. How'd you come up with that, though, and how do you prove it? They don't have any rational answers. And of course, if there is a moral law that manifests objective right and wrong, then that moral law has to exist in the mind outside of man, which means God's mind. And there's that if becoming because again, right? How have you reached that conclusion in a way that isn't just because I want to? That's all they have, and I have yet to see a single example of anyone able to present anything more substantive. To deny his existence is to deny the existence of any objective moral law. Great! That was easy because there is no such thing as any objective moral law, at least nothing that you can reach with anything but your fee-fees. All of these moral arguments fall apart because none of them are objectively demonstrable or defensible. Now, this ought to be the end of the video. We've taken on all 10 of their claims, and all 10 of them have completely fallen apart. But Michael Egnor asked a couple of questions at the end, so I figure we might as well tackle them too. Did everything come from nothing for no reason? No, because nobody says that. The majority of the cosmological models that we have do not mention nothing at all, plus reason is meaningless. Why did the rocks fall down, to go back to the previous point? Well, there is no why, there's only how. And that's a problem with the religious. They want purpose when there just isn't any. That's just how reality works. So that's one down. What's next? What caused the Big Bang? Where did the Big Bang come from? What caused the laws of nature? And again, he's looking for a being and a purpose, none of which are apparent. Just because you want it, that doesn't mean you get it. The simple reality is, we don't know, and to be honest, we might never know. Welcome to the real world. Not knowing isn't an excuse to just make up an answer that makes you happy. Don't be stupid. Why is there evil? Because there are things the humans don't happen to like. Again, there is no universal definition of what constitutes evil and what constitutes good. There is no objective anything here. It's all human interpretation, and the religious, they don't tend to like that, do they? He goes on to say, in fact, I think the problem of evil is a problem for atheism, and we'll end up there before this gets too long. The reason is that if there is no God, there is no moral law, and there is no objective right or wrong, so there is no such thing as evil. Yeah, sorry, that just doesn't follow. I will agree we have no good reason to think that there are any gods or are any objective morals, but because good and evil are demonstrably subjective, whether you like that or not, good and evil do exist, at least as labels that humans slap on things that they either approve of or just don't like. There's just stuff that happens. Now, we might not like the stuff that happens, but that's just an opinion. That doesn't mean that what happens is evil. Why not? Because if we look at the dictionary definition of evil, it says rising from actual or imputed bad character or conduct. Well, who decides that? We do. This is just the religious laying claim to terms without having any right to do so. Again, everybody's just like we are. But you're just wrong. Evil is a term that humans made up and use as we deem appropriate. It doesn't matter if you like that or not. It's just how it works. So that's 10 up and 10 down plus some bonus content at the end. What's really obvious is the fact that the religious aren't playing ball on the same court as the rest of us. They are fundamentally not talking about the same things that we are, and when we try to explain it to them, they just stuff their fingers in their ears, clench their eyes closed, and scream, "I can't hear you!" This is, as always, a matter of fee-fees over facts, and they have no interest whatsoever in ever changing their tune. They don't want to understand what we're talking about. They just want to believe. It's why having discussions with the terminally religious always goes so poorly, because they're already at the conclusion that they want to reach, and they're not willing to backtrack to reality. Now, this isn't just a problem for the religious. Lots of people have it. In fact, I just answered a question over on Reddit where an atheist said they didn't want to live in a world where good and evil were subjective. Too bad. You have to learn to live in the real world. But I can't, he whined, and then he ran away. These people have serious mental and emotional problems. It doesn't matter what kind of world you wish you lived in, only the kind that's actually there. That's fundamentally the problem with religion. These people have entirely unrealistic expectations. Maybe it's time they just grew the hell up.